Nebraska Territory, August 1873. The wind carried a dry, bitter edge across the open prairie as Sheriff Silas Conley reined in his chestnut gelding at the top of the ridge. Dust curled around his boots in lazy spirals. He had seen someone down by the wagon track that cut through the tall buffalo grass like a torn seam. She sat in the dirt, knees drawn up beneath a worn traveling skirt, her shoulders trembling with quiet sobs. Her bonnet had slipped halfway off, revealing a mass of dark curls tangled by the wind. A small carpetbag lay beside her, scuffed and abandoned like she had given up dragging it. There was no wagon, no horse, just her. Silas nudged his gelding down the slope, boots clicking gently against the stirrups. As he got closer, the woman lifted her head. Her cheeks were streaked with tears and dust. Her eyes, wide and wary, met his. "Madam?" Silas asked softly, not dismounting yet. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, but it was hesitant. Her lips parted like she meant to speak, but nothing came out. He climbed down, careful not to startle her. "My name's Silas Conley. I'm sheriff over in Dry Willow, 'bout 4 miles west. You out here alone?" Her voice cracked. "Yes." "Where were you headed?" She looked down at her hands. They were clenched tight in her lap. "Nowhere," she whispered. "Not anymore." Silas bent down to her level, the wind tugging at the brim of his hat. "You got a name?" "Geneva," she said. "Geneva Fletcher." "You running from someone, Geneva?" Her eyes filled again, but she blinked fast, trying to hold herself together. "No, I got no one left." Silas glanced around the wide, empty land. The sun was starting to dip, painting the grass gold. No way he could leave her out here. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me get you out of the dirt. You can ride back with me. I got a spare room at the house." She stared at him, unsure, like she did not know whether to trust a kind voice. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added. "You got my word." After a pause, she took his outstretched hand. Hers was cold, trembling. He helped her up into the saddle first, then climbed in behind her, steadying her with one arm. She was too light. She leaned forward, small and quiet, and did not say anything the whole ride back. Silas's home sat a little outside town, tucked behind a line of cottonwoods. 1-story, whitewashed wood, porch out front. Simple, but solid. He had built most of it with his own hands after taking the badge 6 years ago. He helped Geneva down and guided her up the porch steps. She moved like her body had forgotten how to trust the ground. Once inside, he gave her a blanket and a cup of warm water from the kettle. She sat at the kitchen table like she did not know if she belonged. "You hungry?" She nodded, barely. He fried up some salt pork and boiled potatoes. When he set the plate in front of her, she hesitated before lifting the fork. As she ate, he sat across from her, watching her hands. They were red and chapped. Her dress was dusty, threadbare at the elbows. When she finished, she looked up, like she owed him something. "Thank you." "You're welcome." He waited a moment. "You got family anywhere?" She shook her head slowly. "No one." "You heading west?" "I was." Her voice was quiet. "I thought there might be work in Cheyenne. But the man I was traveling with left me. Took the wagon, the horse, everything. I woke up before sunrise and he was just gone." Silas leaned back in his chair. "You married to him?" "No," she said quickly. "He was just someone who offered me help. I paid him what I had." He nodded, jaw tight. "You can stay here for now. I got that extra room. And you do not owe me a thing." Her eyes filled again. She looked down at her hands in her lap. "I do not know where else to go. You do not have to figure it out tonight." She gave a small nod. Her shoulders dropped, just a little. Later, after she had bathed and gone to bed in the spare room, Silas stood on the porch, watching the stars come out. The wind had calmed. The prairie was quiet. But something inside him was not. He had seen plenty of people come through Dry Willow with nowhere to go, but none of them had looked like that woman had, like the world had stopped seeing her. The next morning, Geneva was already up, sweeping the porch with a stiff broom she had found by the door. Her hair was tied back, and there was a faint color in her cheeks now. "You do not have to do that," Silas said, stepping out with 2 mugs of coffee. "I know," she said. But I needed to move. He handed her a mug. Their fingers brushed. She looked at him, unsure again. But this time she did not pull away. The days passed slow but steady. Geneva stayed. She helped around the house cooking, mending, feeding the chickens. Silas did not ask questions. He just made sure she had what she needed. Then one evening, about 2 weeks later, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Geneva said quietly, "I had a son." Silas looked over. She was staring at the horizon. He was 3. Got sick back in Missouri. Fever took him fast. After that, there was nothing. No husband, no family. Just me. "I am sorry," Silas said, his voice low. She nodded but did not say anything more. He reached over, set his hand gently on hers. She did not pull away. That night he could not sleep. He kept thinking about the way she had looked when she said his name earlier, soft and careful, like it meant something now, like maybe she was starting to feel safe, and maybe he was starting to feel something too. The next morning, he found her out by the chicken coop, sleeves rolled up, sun on her face. She smiled when she saw him. "Morning, Silas." He smiled back, heart thudding just a little too fast. "Morning, Geneva." The first frost came early that year. By mid-September, the grass in the lowlands had turned brittle, and the morning air carried a bite that clung to boots and breath alike. Silas had pulled the storm windows down from the loft 2 days earlier and leaned them against the back wall of the house, knowing he'd need Geneva's help to fit them before the cold settled in for good. She was waiting near the fence when he returned that evening, her hands dusted with flour and her sleeves rolled just above the wrist. A pie cooled on the windowsill behind her, the kitchen lamp already lit through the glass. "You said you had a hammer that wasn't half rust," she said by way of greeting, nodding toward the windows. "In the shed. Handle's cracked but it holds." He paused. "You baked that for someone special?" Geneva tilted her head, eyes unreadable in the dusk. "Maybe." They worked side by side in the falling dark, the old nails groaning as they went in. Silas held the frame steady while she guided the glass into place, her fingers steady despite the cold. When the last pane was secured, she leaned back against the wall, brushing a loose strand of hair from her temple with her forearm. "I was a maid once," she said. "Back in Springfield. Before I married." Silas straightened, his breath rising visible between them. "You liked it." "I liked the order of it. Knowing what each day would bring." He nodded. "Hard to keep things orderly out here." She gave a small sound, not quite agreement, not quite a laugh, and turned toward the porch. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and lard softened crust warmed the kitchen. Geneva sliced the pie with a sure hand, setting 2 plates on the table without speaking. Silas took a bite, then looked up. "You ever think of settling somewhere again?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with her eyes on the pie, she said, "I think about not moving." That night, she stayed up after him, mending a thin tear in the hem of her dress beneath the lamp. He left his door ajar, hearing the soft scrape of thread through fabric, the hush of her movements. It was a quiet comfort, that sound. By the week's end, word had come from a neighboring homestead that one of the Tanner boys had fallen from the hayloft and broken his leg. Silas rode out to help lift him down from the loft, then stayed to speak with their mother while the local doctor strapped the boy's leg. When he returned, Geneva was on the porch with his ledger open in her lap, a pencil between her fingers. She looked up, not startled, just expectant. "You keep records of fines?" she asked. He wiped the dust from his face. "I try. Some stay paid. Some don't. You write slow." He dropped into the chair beside her. "That's not news." She handed him the ledger. Her additions were neat, the columns balanced, the names spelled proper. She'd filled in 3 months of gaps in half a day. "I helped the storekeeper in Springfield sometimes," she said. "He paid in dried goods and coffee. You want to help keep the books here? If you'll have me." He nodded, watching her face. There was a steadiness in her now, careful but present. At the harvest social 2 weeks later, Geneva wore a blue dress borrowed from the parson's wife. It was a little short in the sleeves, but she didn't seem to mind. Silas offered her his arm without speaking, and she took it. Inside the church hall, the lanterns glowed soft against the rafters, and the fiddle music started slow. Geneva stood near the back, not hiding, but not stepping forward either. "You dance?" Silas asked. "Not much." "Me neither." Still, when the reel began, he held out his hand. She hesitated, then placed hers in his. They moved careful at first, learning each other's rhythm. She laughed once, quiet and surprised, when he missed a step and nearly bumped into the McClary twins. "Suppose we're not built for flourishes," he murmured. "Suppose not," she said, breath warm against his collar. Later, walking back down the road under a cloudless sky, Silas glanced sideways. "You think on staying long-term?" She didn't look away from the horizon. "I think on building something that doesn't vanish come morning." He took her hand, then no words, no pause, and she let her fingers slip between his. The porch creaked under their boots when they reached it. Before she stepped inside, Geneva turned. "I never expected you." "I never expected you either," he said. She smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Then she went inside without another word. Silas stood there a while, the night stretching quiet around him, the stars steady overhead. Something in him had shifted, like a door opening slow and sure, letting in light he hadn't known he missed. October settled into the land with gray skies and the smell of wood smoke. The days shortened and the prairie took on a quiet, brittle stillness. Geneva began pulling the heavier quilts from the cedar chest without being asked, and Silas found himself checking the roof shingles and oiling hinges before the first snow had even touched the ground. One morning he came in from feeding the mule and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a small piece of paper in her hands. She didn't look up until he was close. "I found this in the bottom of my bag," she said, holding it out. "It's from the place I worked before I left Missouri. The woman I worked for, she'd written something kind before I left. I must have tucked it away." Silas sat, careful not to touch the paper. "What did she say?" "She said I had a quiet way that made things better. That I didn't take up space, but I steadied the room." Her voice caught. "I never thought she noticed." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Sounds like she saw you clear." Geneva folded the paper again, slower this time. "I don't know what I'm meant to be now." "You don't have to be one thing," he said. "You don't have to prove yourself to stay." She looked at him then, long enough that the lamp flame between them flickered in her eyes. "I know you mean that." The first snow dusted the prairie the next week, light as sifted flour. It didn't last, but it left a hush behind. Geneva began wearing her shawl even inside, and she started keeping a kettle warming on the stove whether they needed it or not. One afternoon, while Silas was splitting wood out back, she stood in the doorway watching him. He paused mid-swing. "You ever think about what your life would have been if you hadn't stayed in Dry Willow?" she asked. "I used to. Not lately." "What changed?" He drove the axe into the block, not looking up. "You did." She didn't answer right away. Then her footsteps crunched toward him. When she reached his side, she took one of the smaller pieces of kindling and turned it over in her hands. "Would it matter to you if I stayed?" He didn't rush the reply. "It would." She placed the kindling on the stack beside him. "Then I will." That night, she made a stew with turnips and dried beans, and they ate it by lantern light while the wind pushed against the windows. Afterward, she took a seat near the fire and began knitting something with pale gray yarn she'd found in the bottom of a basket. "What's it going to be?" Silas asked from his chair across the hearth. "Scarf," she said. "For you." He blinked. "You don't have to." "I know," she said, not looking up. "But I want to." The fire snapped softly between them. Silas let the quiet stretch. "I never pictured someone like you sitting in my house." She set her needles down. "What kind of someone did you picture?" "Couldn't say. Just know I didn't expect someone who listens the way you do, or who sees things I don't speak of." She stood then, crossed to his chair, and sat on the floor beside him, knees tucked beneath her. "I see you," she said, "and I never expected that either." His hand hovered a moment, then rested gently on her hair. She leaned into it, eyes closed, and the whole room seemed to pause with them. In the days that followed, they began moving around each other without thought. She folded his shirts without asking. He left kindling stacked near the stove before she woke. When she laughed, it came quicker now, and when he smiled, it reached all the way to his eyes. One evening, as he returned from a late patrol around the edge of town, he found her on the porch with a tin box open in her lap. "These were my boys," she said when he sat beside her. Inside were a pair of small leather shoes, a carved wooden horse, and a faded cloth rabbit with one ear missing. Silas didn't speak. He only reached over, covered her hand with his, and sat with her until the stars came out. Later that night, she came to his doorway and stood there, unsure. "I don't want to sleep alone tonight," she said. He stood and reached for her hand. "You won't." They lay in his narrow bed, facing one another, warm beneath the quilt. She touched his chest, just over his heart. "I've been waiting to feel safe again," she said. "I think I do now." He kissed her forehead and they lay still, their breath rising together. In the morning, the world outside was quiet and white. Snow had come in the night, soft and deep. They stood at the window, wrapped in the same blanket, watching it fall. "You ever think we might build something more?" she asked. He looked at her, steady as sunrise. "I already think we are." The first full snow came heavy and wet, bending the cottonwood branches and blanketing the prairie in a hush that swallowed sound. By early morning, Silas had shoveled a clean path from the porch to the barn, boots crunching through the drifted white. When he stepped back inside, Geneva had already set a kettle near the hearth, her cheeks flushed from the cold that slipped in through the seams of the door. She didn't look up from where she was pressing oats into biscuits, but her voice was soft. "I heard you go out. Didn't want the mule trapped in," Silas said, peeling off his coat and setting it to dry across the chair. "Roof held, though." "No leaks." Geneva nodded, pressing the last biscuit onto the tin before sliding it into the oven. "I've been thinking about making a small garden come spring. Not much, just enough for onions and carrots." He leaned against the doorframe, watching her movements. The soil near the creek soft enough. "We could turn it by March if the frost breaks early." She glanced over her shoulder. "I'd like that. I want to grow things again." After breakfast, while the biscuits cooled, Silas brought up a box from the back of the pantry, wooden, nailed shut, covered in a film of dust that hadn't been disturbed in years. He set it on the floor between them. "I was saving this for someday," he said, prying the top open with the claw of a hammer. "Figured maybe someday's close." Inside were tools worn smooth with use and all, a hand plane, 2 carving knives, and a square of tanned leather folded around a bundle of seed packets, their paper brittle with age. Geneva lifted them carefully, reading the faded labels aloud. "Pole beans. Early cabbage. Yellow squash." She looked up. "These still good?" "Maybe. Or maybe it's the trying that counts." She set the seeds aside and unfolded the leather. Tucked within it was a small carving, no bigger than her palm, a figure of a kneeling horse, whittled from cottonwood, the detail delicate around the hooves. "You made this?" "A long time ago," Silas said, "when I thought I'd have someone to pass it to." Geneva didn't ask who he meant. Instead, she reached for his hand and held it, her fingers wrapping around his slowly, as if learning the shape of something permanent. Later that week, the town schoolhouse caught fire. The stove flue had clogged and the chimney backdraft. Silas rode in ahead of the smoke, hauling buckets with the rest of the townsfolk, but the front wall collapsed before the flames were out. When he came home, his coat still smelled of char and ash clung to his hair. Geneva met him at the door. "Anyone hurt?" "No, but the roof's gone. They'll need somewhere to hold lessons till it's rebuilt." "They can use our parlor," she said before he could ask. "We've got chairs enough, and the stove gives off good heat." Silas studied her face. "You sure?" "I am." The following Monday, children came in boots caked with snow, trailing scarves and laughter. Geneva taught them letters with chalk on the back of a flour sack stretched across the wall. Silas fixed the benches in the evenings, whittling splinters smooth by lamplight. One night, after the last child had gone, Geneva lingered near the hearth. She was rolling a coin between her fingers, worn silver catching the firelight. "I kept this since the day my boy was born," she said. "I'd meant to give it to him when he turned 10. He never got the chance." Silas didn't speak. He waited. "I've been thinking," she went on, "about what it means to give things away. Not because they're no longer needed, but because they ought to be used." She crossed the room and pressed the coin into his hand. "I want you to keep it." He looked down at the coin, then back at her. "I'll carry it." The days lengthened slowly, and by mid-January the snow had begun to thin. The mule shed its winter coat in tufts, and the creek behind the house started to run again, slow and shallow. One afternoon, Silas returned from town with a parcel wrapped in canvas. Geneva was mending a child's scarf by the window when he set it beside her. "What's this?" He untied the twine. Inside was a book worn, the leather cover cracked at the spine. She opened it and ran her fingers over the first page. "Poems," she said, surprised. "You read them." "When I can. I used to copy verses onto the backs of envelopes. Made things feel less empty." He hesitated. "Would you read one aloud?" She turned a few pages, then began, her voice low and steady. The words rose between them, full of quiet longing and soft hope. When she finished, she closed the book and turned it over in her hands. "I never thought I'd read poetry to someone again," she said. "I never thought I'd want to hear it." The fire cracked between them. Geneva leaned forward, resting her head against his shoulder. He didn't move, only reached for her hand and held it, the coin warm between their palms. Outside, dusk settled, soft and slow. Inside, the room held a stillness that wasn't silence. It was belonging. The thaw came slow but steady. By the final week of February, the last of the snow had receded into the gullies, leaving behind soft earth and the smell of wet bark. Geneva opened the windows just a crack to let the air move through the house again, and Silas took to scraping old paint from the porch rail with a penknife in the afternoons, not because it needed doing just then, but because it left him close to where she was. The schoolchildren had returned to their rebuilt classroom 2 days prior, leaving the parlor oddly quiet. Geneva stood by the empty hearth that morning, dusting the shelf with a strip of muslin. She turned when Silas came in from the yard, his sleeves rolled and his collar open to the breeze. "We could host a supper," she said. "For the families. Just once. To say thank you." He leaned against the doorframe. "You want to cook for half the county?" "No. Just the ones who came here when things burned down." Her gaze drifted toward the table where the chairs still sat in a loose half-circle. "I want to feed the people who helped us become part of things." That Saturday, the house filled with the smell of smoked ham and vinegared greens. Geneva wore a dress she'd sewn from washed muslin, pale green with a stitched hem, and Silas wore his Sunday vest without the coat. The guests brought cornbread, jars of pickled beets, and a jug of cider that got passed around until cheeks flushed and laughter filled the walls. After the sun fell, lanterns were hung along the porch railings, and a fiddler from town played slow tunes while couples swayed in the dirt yard. Silas and Geneva stood near the steps, watching the circle of dancers turn under the stars. "You've made this place feel different," Silas said. "You mean cleaner?" Her eyes glinted in the dark. "I mean warmer." He offered his hand and she took it. They didn't dance much, just moved in slow rhythm beneath the cottonwoods, her head near his collar, their steps easy. When the last guest rode off and the lanterns were doused, Silas didn't return to his own room. He followed Geneva upstairs, where she'd started sleeping once the schoolchildren left. The room was small, with a sloped ceiling and a simple quilt tucked over the bed. She turned to face him in the doorway, her hands clasped at her waist. "I don't want to keep 2 rooms anymore." "You won't need to." Spring came in fits and starts. Geneva planted her garden with careful rows, her hands in the soil before the sun fully cleared the trees. Silas built a low fence around it to keep the hares out, and they laid stones along the path so she wouldn't slip when it rained. One morning in early April, as Silas was drawing water from the well, Geneva approached with a letter in hand. The envelope was creased and dusty, The seal broken. This came yesterday. Postmaster said it had been forwarded twice. It's from a cousin of mine, Julia. She's in Kansas now, says she thought I might still be alive. She's got a boy the same age mine would have been. Silas studied her face. You want to go see her? I don't. Her fingers tightened on the letter. It's strange. Knowing someone remembered me. You could write her back. I will. She didn't speak of it again, and the letter stayed tucked between the pages of her poetry book, like a stone set under water there, but still and settled. In May, Geneva stood barefoot in the kitchen peeling apples for a tart when she said, I don't want to be a guest in this house. You haven't been for a long while. I want it in my name too. That afternoon, Silas rode with her into Dry Willow. They signed the ledger at the clerk's desk, her name set beside his in ink that bled into the paper. I never signed anything that belonged to me before, she said as they stepped into the sunlight. Silas took her hand. Now it's ours. By midsummer, the garden had taken root. Carrots pushed up from the soil, and the beans clung to the poles like they'd always been there. Geneva preserved jars of jam and pickled onions, her shelves lined with the slow work of care. Silas fixed the back step and replaced the loose slate on the roof, whistling under his breath as he worked. One evening, as they shelled peas on the porch, she turned toward him. I don't wonder any more what comes next. He looked up from the bowl. Why's that? Because it's this. Sitting with you. Warm hands and quiet evenings. He reached for her, and she leaned into his side, their shoulders pressed together. I was thinking, she said, voice low. We could build a cradle. Silas was quiet a moment, then set the bowl aside. You think we might need one? If we're lucky. I'll start shaping the wood tomorrow. They held each other there until the sky turned lavender and the first stars blinked into place. Years passed. The cradle stood beneath the front window, carved from pine and worn smooth with use. Their daughter, Anna, had Geneva's eyes and Silas's quiet way of watching the world. She grew up with dirt under her nails and poems read aloud on rainy days. Geneva taught her how to braid onions and when to plant by the moon. Silas taught her to ride and how to mend a fence without wasting nails. The three of them walked to town for church, for market, for the harvest fair. They never left Dry Willow. Some nights, when the wind was still and the fire burned low, Silas would sit with Geneva on the porch, their hands folded in each other's lap. The cottonwoods had grown taller. The path to the barn had deepened where their boots had worn it down year after year. You still think about what might have been? Geneva would ask. Silas would shake his head. I think about what is. That's enough. And it was. Always.